A Night in Carrington Heights, Part 1. The city of Carrington Heights was alive in its own restless way. Neon signs flickered on and off like weary sentinels fighting sleep, advertising late-night diners and all-night laundromats. The wail of distant sirens echoed faintly, blending into the constant hum of late-night traffic. Somewhere, not too far away, a dog barked, then fell silent. It wasn't the kind of neighborhood that made the news, but it wasn't the kind people bragged about either. It sat in a gray zone, suspended between respectability and risk. Elias Carter, a 36-year-old black man, walked down the dimly lit sidewalk with a slow, unhurried pace. His breath was visible in the crisp night air, each exhale forming ghostly clouds that dissolved behind him. It had been a long day, 12 hours in court, followed by 2 meetings that had dragged on longer than they should have. Now, at nearly midnight, he was finally heading home. His suit jacket, navy blue with subtle pinstripes, was slung casually over his shoulder. His tie was loosened, the top button of his white dress shirt undone. His polished leather shoes made a rhythmic clicking sound against the concrete, a quiet counterpoint to the city's nocturnal soundtrack. He wasn't in a hurry. There was no need. He had nothing to hide. But he was careful, always careful. As Elias reached the next block, headlights flared suddenly from around the corner. He instinctively slowed, watching as the bright beams swept over him. A moment later, the sharp, piercing blare of a police siren shattered the stillness. His heart gave a slow, heavy thud. He stopped walking but didn't step off the curb. He knew better. The squad car, an older model but still intimidating with its cage of lights and black and white paint job, rolled up alongside him. Red and blue lights bathed the brick walls around them in pulses of color. The flashing lights painted Elias' dark skin in surreal shades of crimson and cobalt. The driver's side door opened with a metallic groan. A white police officer stepped out, tall and broad-shouldered, his hand resting casually, but not too casually, on the grip of his holstered firearm. The officer adjusted his utility belt as he walked forward, boots crunching on the gritty pavement. His name tag read, Officer Blake Monroe. "Hey, you," Monroe said. His voice was sharp, authoritative, leaving no room for ambiguity. Elias exhaled slowly, schooling his features into neutrality. He knew this dance. He had learned the steps years ago. "Evening, officer," he replied, his tone even. "Can I help you with something?" Monroe's eyes swept over Elias, taking in the tailored suit, the polished shoes, the expensive wristwatch peeking from under his shirt cuff. But something in his gaze said none of it mattered. "Not here. Not now. What are you doing out here this late?" Monroe asked, taking another step forward. "Just heading home," Elias answered. "Finished work late tonight." Monroe cocked his head slightly, squinting as though trying to see something more. "We've had reports," he said after a beat. "Suspicious person in the area. You match the description." Elias felt his stomach tighten. He kept his hands in plain sight, fingers relaxed but visible. "I see," he said calmly. "What's the description, if you don't mind me asking?" Monroe's jaw tightened. "Male. Black. Late 30s. Wearing a suit." A bitter taste bloomed at the back of Elias' throat. He forced it down. "That does sound like me," he admitted quietly. "I can show you my ID, if you'd like." Monroe didn't smile. He didn't relax. "Turn around," he ordered. "Hand where I can see them." For a moment, just a moment, Elias considered saying something more. But he didn't. He knew better. He turned slowly, carefully, raising his hands to shoulder height. The night air felt colder on his exposed skin. A second officer got out of the car. This one was younger, leaner, his uniform crisp. His name tag read Officer Ryan Cole. He stayed by the patrol car, watching silently, his expression unreadable. His hand hovered near his radio, but didn't move toward his weapon. Monroe stepped in close behind Elias, his movements efficient but rough. His hands patted Elias down with more force than necessary. They checked the inside of his waistband, tugged his shirt up roughly to feel along his lower back, ran along the seams of his trousers. Elias clenched his jaw, but said nothing. Monroe's hand finally dipped into Elias' back pocket and pulled out his wallet. He flipped it open with practiced ease and froze. There was a pause, brief, but heavy with unspoken realization. Monroe stared at the ID in his gloved hand. His face, already pale in the harsh strobe of the squad car lights, seemed to drain of color entirely. His breathing grew shallow. He swallowed hard, Adam's apple bobbing noticeably. "Wait a second," Monroe murmured. Elias turned his head slightly, his face still composed. "Something wrong, officer?" His voice was calm, though there was a steel edge beneath it. Monroe didn't answer immediately. His eyes flicked between the ID and Elias' face, then back to the ID. The name, there was unmistakable. Eliezer Carter, United States District Judge, Northern District of Illinois. Monroe licked his lips nervously. "Judge Carter," he said, as if the words themselves were foreign. The silence stretched on. Cole leaned forward slightly, catching a glimpse of the ID from his position by the car. His eyes widened. "Oh, shit," Cole whispered under his breath. Monroe straightened abruptly, his entire demeanor shifting in an instant. The aggression evaporated. The posturing vanished. Something else took its place, something that looked a lot like fear. "Sir," Monroe began, his voice suddenly strained. I apologize for the misunderstanding." Elias turned fully now, lowering his hands with deliberate slowness. He took his wallet back from Monroe's trembling fingers and slid it into his inside jacket pocket. "A misunderstanding," he repeated, tasting the word. Monroe cleared his throat, struggling for composure. "We were just following standard procedures, sir. Routine check. You know, for safety." Elias took a slow step closer, his gaze never wavering. "No, Officer Monroe," he said, his voice quiet but cutting. "I don't think this was standard procedure." Monroe said nothing. He couldn't. Cole shifted uncomfortably, glancing at his partner with a look that was part reproach, part disbelief. Elias regarded them both for a long moment. Then he asked, his tone even, "Tell me something, Officer Monroe. Would you stop me if I were white?" Monroe opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His face reddened, his jaw working helplessly. "Would you have patted me down, treated me like a suspect, if I looked different?" Elias pressed. Cole looked down at his boots. He knew the answer. So did Monroe. Elias exhaled slowly, his expression unreadable. "See, here's the difference between you and me," he said quietly. "You saw me and assumed I was a threat. I saw you and assumed you were just doing your job." The words hung in the air like smoke from a slow-burning fire. Monroe's face was flushed now, his breathing uneven. He looked smaller somehow, less certain of himself than he had been just moments before. Cole finally stepped forward, his voice sincere if awkward. "Judge Carter," he said, "I truly apologize. This shouldn't have happened." Elias nodded once, a small, almost imperceptible motion. "No, it shouldn't have." He studied Monroe one last time. "I hope you think about this, officer," Elias said. "The next time you decide someone looks suspicious." Monroe nodded mutely, his throat working as he swallowed hard. He had never felt so exposed in his life. Elias adjusted his tie, straightened his jacket, and turned on his heel. He walked away without another word. No handcuffs, no raised voices, no violence, just a lesson delivered in silence. Monroe and Cole watched as he disappeared into the night. They didn't speak. They didn't move. Neither of them would forget this night, and neither would Elias. As he reached the front door of his apartment building, he exhaled slowly and keyed in his code. The door unlocked with a soft buzz. He stepped inside, the lobby empty and still. He leaned back against the door for a moment before heading up to his apartment. This wasn't the first time. It wouldn't be the last. But this time, justice had been served without the need for a courtroom. And sometimes that was enough. Always remember, hope finds a way.